You can feel it, in England anyway. The country, its people, its businesses are slowly emerging from the inside. The government's unwinding of lockdown has stepped up a notch this week. Little by little, our old lives, or bits of them, are honing into view.
The changes we are making are limited and cautious. It's thanks to the caution we've shown so far that all 5 tests are being met.
There is reason for caution. It is true that the country has progressed much on every metric, but things are nowhere near rosy. The 7-day rolling average for deaths is 256, much reduced from 943 at the peak, but still higher than some other countries were when they started to unwind lockdown. Infections too are at 2,312 a day, again way down, but still higher than they were in late March. And the all-important R number, the reproduction value of the disease, we were told today is between 0.7 and 0.9. Remember, if it goes above 1, the number of infections will start rising quickly. The government's scientific advisors struck a cautious tone.
We still have a significant burden of infection, and the R is close to 1. That means there is not a lot of room to do things.
There isn't much room to manoeuvre, and all the bits of life government is opening up, like retail, will have to do so in a circumscribed way. Elsewhere in Europe, life on the high street, as at home, has happened slowly.
People have come back in the immediate early days after restrictions are lifted, but certainly that demand is subdued. It won't be like a tap being turned back on and we'll be back to where we were at the beginning of March. I think it is going to be a slow build-up over a period of time.
Teachers too are urgently planning for a partial reopening. International data shows where reopening has occurred, it hasn't done much to push up R. For teachers like those here at St George's in Battersea, they would be much more confident if they thought the right systems were in place to manage the worst.
People like to know things for definite, and in this situation, understandably, nobody can know anything for definite. Obviously, there's always going to be risk, and I think people would then need to feel that the risk was being monitored very, very carefully, so that if we did see, any increased infection in schools or in the community, and obviously the track and trace would be a good way forward with that. So I think, more reassurances about that being up and running and working, I think that would help.
And it seems as though track and trace is still the weak link in the government's response. Track and trace is supposed to be the thing which is underpinning all of this, but it was said today that the head of the new track and trace system told MPs that the new regime won't be up and running until the end of June. Now, if that's the case, it will be all the more difficult to control localised flare-ups where they occur. And then there's the potential damage from the Dominic Cummings affair, where there is a sense that the rules no longer apply will pervade a track and trace system which requires those contacted to self-isolate.
Because it allows localised patterns of infection.
But is a different approach to lifting lockdown needed altogether? Is it now time to acknowledge that one size fits all might not be best at this stage of the pandemic?
Now it's going to have to be, I think, much more sophisticated, and we've been suggesting that we can stratify or segment the population into multiple groups, maybe 5, maybe even more, which range from people who are at very high risk if they do get the virus. For example, older people, might have a 10, 20, 30% mortality rate if you're old and frail, down to very low risk, where school kids who have an extremely low mortality rate, even if they get the virus.
As we emerge from our seclusion, we do so relieved but fearful that the seclusion might await us again. How this is unwound, how carefully, and for whom, will determine if it does.